I think the biggest mistakes is quitting too early. I used to share this story back when I was working with college students when I worked for Inroads, and the story was called Acres of Diamonds, and it was about a guy who owned this big patch of land, and he was trying to find diamonds, and he finally gave up and sold his property to somebody else. And that somebody else invested a few more dollars to hire engineers, environmental engineers, and geologists to figure out where diamonds would most likely be. And the way the story goes is, less than 10 feet from where the guy stopped searching was the start of Acres of Diamonds.
My name is Fela Abioye, and this is How to Corporate, my digital show dedicated to helping you identify what's holding you back so you can advance your career. Today's topic, rejection is part of the game, with my guest, Will Womble.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. So, man, we'll just get right into it. I mean, I guess just to kick it off, you want to maybe give the folks a little bit about your background, just, a little bit about, yourself?
Sure. So I am a proud father of 3, husband. I have been in the pharmaceutical biotech space for almost 25 years. So I'm originally from New Orleans, where I went to undergrad. I went to the University of New Orleans. I have a master's degree from Texas A&M Commerce, and I also completed executive education at Georgetown, Kellogg, and Northwestern up in Chicago, and SMU in Dallas, Texas. In terms of my experience in the industry, I started off as a sales rep, and I stumbled into this industry. So I was actually working in nonprofit, working for an organization called Inroads, whose mission is to develop and place talented minority youth in business and industry and prepare them for corporate and community leadership through internships and corporate training and development. So I was doing that type of work, and I actually recruited a small pharmaceutical company to sponsor interns at Inroads. And so I'm a firm believer in how you do anything is how you do everything. So based on the way I showed up working in that nonprofit space, they actually recruited me to come work as a pharmaceutical rep. And that was some almost 25 years ago. From there, I worked at several other companies. I am now a director of regional marketing, which is still customer facing, but I lead a team across really 3/4 of the US. So everything west of the Eastern Seaboard is what I'm responsible for on a launch brand. It's been a really fun journey. I've learned a lot along the way, but I've been very fortunate, very blessed, and really excited to share my story and help others to find their way to this industry so that they can have success for themselves and build generational wealth for their families.
Yeah, no, that's really awesome. I mean, clearly you've been doing this for a while, and you've seen and been to a lot of different places that kind of crossed your journey, which I think is really unique. And we kind of talked a little bit about your experience with Inroads, and Inroads that's a great program. I've personally never been able to, or I haven't at least worked with them directly, but I've kind of worked with them somewhat indirectly. And something that I thought was really cool when we talked previously was, I think you initially started off in the accounting realm, right? Right? When you were getting your degree, and you decided to kind of make that pivot. I kind of wanted to hear from you, from your perspective, what made you make that change, right? When you were thinking like, okay, I'm gonna go to school for this, but then somehow I spend my whole career, for the most part, in pharmaceutical sales.
You know what, Fela? I'll take it a step back even further.
Mm-hmm.
So Inroads was brand new to New Orleans when I was a high school senior. And initially, I wasn't one of the students invited to compete for an internship. What happened is one of my buddies showed up to school in a suit. And I'm like, hey, man, why are you wearing a suit? He says, I've got an interview. I'm like, an interview for what? An interview for an internship. I'm like, well, how'd you get that? And what was the criteria?
Yeah.
So he said, hey, you had to have a 3.0 or better. And the counselor nominated me. I just saw an opportunity that this could be something. And I felt like I wasn't even being given a shot at it. And so I just pleaded with her to put me in the talent pool to compete, to give me a shot to interview. And I wasn't going to leave her office until she gave me that shot to interview. So what happened was I got the chance to interview. I was the last one to interview on that day. I was the only person who interviewed who had on a T-shirt and shorts because I wasn't prepared for the interview.
Yeah.
And I did well in that interview and then the interviews that followed. The reason I ended up with an accounting internship was I had good math grades and good math scores. And that's where the opportunity was where I could interview for. So I interviewed for a couple of accounting firms, and KPMG, which at the time was the largest public accounting firm in the world, granted me an internship. After interning with them over several summers while I was in college, I had an epiphany. And that epiphany was, well, let me backtrack. The goal in public accounting is to get to partner, right? You become a partner, you earn a lot more money, it's generational wealth for you and your family.
Yep.
And so, the conventional wisdom is, okay, if I'm the best accountant I can be, I can get to partner. Well, that's not the reality. The epiphany was the people who make partner are the people who bring on the biggest clients. And the people who bring on the biggest clients are the best salespeople. And the epiphany for me was, hey, if I have to be a salesperson, maybe I shouldn't be pursuing accounting. Maybe I should be pursuing marketing, which I had more interest in anyway. So at that time, I was already a junior and changed my major to marketing. And that's what kind of shifted my focus from accounting with inroads to ultimately sales, with me landing up in pharma.
High school, I don't know if most kids would have recognized something like that and said, okay, let me go and get myself together and just say, you know what, it's cool. I'll miss out on it. Maybe I'll do something like that when I get to college. So, so the fact that you're able to kind of put two and two together so early on, I think clearly has led to your early success, which I think is really awesome. That's a really great story.
Hey, I call it divine intervention. I can tell you that I was very hungry and wasn't sure kind of how I was going to be successful, but I very much wanted to be successful. My mom, who didn't earn a lot of money, it told me that I had expensive taste. And in order for me to be happy as an adult, I need to find something to do that's going to earn a lot of money. I saw an opportunity and competed for it. And even as a team leader, as a sales leader, as a marketing leader, you really have to want it, right? So when I'm hiring people, outside of the obvious experience that I want them to have, they have to have a hunger. And what I often tell people, whether they work for me or whether they're students that I'm mentoring or even my own kids, is, hey, listen, I can't want it more than you. So if I'm chasing somebody down to help them be successful, they're not going to be successful. They should be coming to me saying, hey, here's what I want to do, or can you help me with this? And that was kind of my approach. I was very hungry. I wanted to be successful. And an opportunity that I just happened to observe. This guy comes to school in a suit who, nobody wears a suit in high school. So it worked out.
No, that's awesome. I think you hit on a lot of really key nuggets there about wanting it more than quote unquote the next person, right? Constantly remaining hungry. I think sometimes we forget that. When we go out and seek out mentorships or we go out and seek out opportunities, I think sometimes people want to be convinced, right, that they should, go after an opportunity or be convinced that, okay, why should I want to do this? Well, I mean, hey, look, you asked me, you asked me for the opportunity, right? You asked me, for the relationship, for the connection. I think some of the best folks who are able to have early success, I think have that same trait. So I think that's really awesome. That you kind of highlighted that there. And so thinking about how relationships are key, right? Relationships are a big piece of that. So how has that played a factor for you in your success?
It's been critical. Every business is a relationship business. And I have to kind of explain this to people, especially people outside of the sales realm, but even people in the sales world. People buy from people they like. So if you've got two options of a product to purchase and everything about those two products is equal, you're going to buy from the person who you have the strongest connection with. And I really appreciate this question because, I've along the way, I've helped a lot of people to get into this industry. And the biggest challenge that most of them have had to clear is recognizing that, having top sales performance in your background, that's table stakes. Understanding the science, a lot of people understand the science, but the unwritten rule in any interview for pharmaceutical sales that the manager is asking him or herself is, hey, can I spend 2 days in the car with this person? Right. And so you can have all the sales awards you want, but if you're not someone that people want to be around and want to spend time with and enjoy spending time with, you're not likely to land the role. So part of the job is being intentional about establishing relationships, being authentic in those relationships, and having it not be a self-serving pursuit. So if I'm engaging you as a potential employer, employee, customer, I need to find out I need to genuinely be concerned and interested in your life and what's happening in your world and what's important to you. It can't be kind of this fake setup where you're faking the funk because you want the sale.
Yeah.
That, people can spot a phony a mile away.
Facts.
Yeah. So I got a story. I have one story about key customer early in my career in the industry. There's a top customer in Monroe, Louisiana, of all places. And I just couldn't break through. He wouldn't even see me, wouldn't talk to me. And it wasn't personal. He was a busy guy.
Yep. And
he had the gatekeeper. And so what happened was I developed a relationship with the gatekeeper. Her name was Jenny. Jenny worked the front desk. And I, after establishing a relationship with her during the course of my job, and by relationship, getting to know more about her, the names of her kids, where she was from, what she was doing on the weekend and spending vacations. Ultimately, I was able to ask her, hey, how can I break through with Dr. J? And she said, well, Dr. J is really interested in tennis. I'm like, well, what do you mean interested? She said, he's a competitive tennis player. He played in college. He's really good. And she says, do you play tennis? I said, no, I don't, but I've always been interested in tennis. I'm really curious about it. So guess what I did? I went and bought a tennis racket. I took tennis lessons. I got a USTA card, the US Tennis Association. And when I went in and got her to get me and help me get in front of him, before we ever talked about business, we talked about tennis. A moment ago, I talked about being authentic. I was I didn't pretend that I had always played tennis. I said, hey, Dr. J, you know what I did? He said, what'd you do? I said, I took up tennis. He says, why'd you do that? I said, because I heard you really like tennis and I had an interest in tennis. And here's what I'm doing. Our relationship went off like a rocket after that. He became one of my top customers after that. And even after I left that area, like after that was no longer a part of my territory, the relationship was maintained for over 20 years. So yeah, relationships are critically important, not just in sales, in any pursuit.
No, I think that's a great example, honestly. And for many reasons, right? Because if you think about it, it's really just about building connections, right? About finding commonality with another person, right? And so you had an interest already, right? In tennis. You knew that he did. He's like, you know what? Hey, let me just take this as an opportunity to kind of pursue something that I already been thinking about anyway, right? And so now I find interest and we have something to talk about. And it's funny because as you were walking through that example, I was thinking about a situation for myself when I was interviewing for a role. And I was interviewing with like the top guy of that department. And 30 minutes of the interview, we probably spent 20 minutes talking about just basketball, where he grew up, in the neighborhood of Houston, where I grew up, which we kind of came from the same parts. We spent 20 minutes talking about that. Right. And we probably spent 10 minutes actually, quote unquote, interviewing. Right. And so after I got the job, he called me back and was like, I felt like I could talk to you all day. I felt like I know everything there is to know about you. And that's the key right there, is building genuine, emphasis on genuine, like you mentioned, connections with people. And that's where it starts. And it doesn't matter whether you're in sales or not, but that's how you really connect with people, and able to get things done. So I think that's a fantastic example. And I hope folks, don't miss that piece of it. So thinking about office politics. I want to kind of pivot a little bit here because I think it's something that, and I always try to touch on this a little bit because I think it's something that folks think that they can get away from, but, I've always described it like this, like office politics is nothing but the human element of working with people, right? It's the human element of working with people. So as long as you work with people in any industry that you work in, there are politics. There are politics. So from your perspective, how has, office politics played a role in your life? Whether it be an advancement or a lack thereof, in your career, do you think?
You are 100% right. It is part of the game. And that's what I explain to people. So I'll respond by way of a story. And this story actually was the run up leading to my first promotion as a leader in the company. Two things. One, I worked at Amgen. It was a big biotech company. And, the way that it works in pharmaceutical sales is you get access through not just your performance, but through the exposure where the right people get to see who you are and then the impact that you're able to make. And so one of the wisest things to do is to seek engagement with executives, but you have to be ready when your moment comes, when your opportunity comes. And so two things happened to me. We'd had a recent reorganization in our company. We had a national sales meeting out at Las Vegas. So we were out at a dinner event where we were meeting our new GM, general manager, who's the vice president of the business unit. And I happened to be sitting close to him. I asked a couple of questions. And as we were getting ready to leave the dinner, his name was Ken. I said, hey, Ken, I would love for you to come spend time in my territory and get to know some of my customers. So for folks who are interested in pharmaceuticals who don't understand, right, the sales reps are the people who are closest to the customer. Mm-hmm. The further you advance in your executive roles, the less interaction you have with customers. Mm-hmm. And you want to be involved with customers. So he immediately had his administrative assistant set up time to work with me and come out and spend time with me in the field. And in that space, he got to see how I showed up representing his brand and his company, the reputation I developed with customers. And I'd always been a top performer. Again, top performance is table stakes. So after he spent time working with me, he invited me to his office in California when I was back in California. And he gave me a test. And I knew it was a test when he gave it to me. And here's how the test went. We had so he was a senior vice president, GM. The VP of sales was not really a good people leader. And the brand wasn't doing as well as it could be doing. And so he asked me, and let's just call this guy Tim. His name wasn't Tim. He says, hey, Will, what do you think about Tim? Mm-hmm. So Tim was a horrible leader. But I couldn't say, hey, Ken, Tim is a horrible thing, right? That would have not served me well. Yeah. And so I said, well, I can share an observation about Tim. He says, oh, well, what's your observation? I said, well, and this is a true story. Mm-hmm. During a launch meeting we had, a sales meeting we had where the sales of the drug wasn't going very well. Mm-hmm. He blasted two managers in front of their teams based on information that was inaccurate. He did it in front of their teams. When he later found out that the information was accurate, he apologized, but he apologized to them in private. And so I explained that to Ken. I said, hey, listen, in all of my studies about leadership, I think he should have done the reverse, which is you praise people publicly. And if you have to have a corrective conversation with them, you do that in private. And I said, so that's the only observation I can share with you about Tim. And unbeknownst to me, he had already made the decision to fire Tim. And Tim was gone within a week. But I think what he wanted to know was from a corporate savvy standpoint, was I going to say, oh, this guy's horrible? Or was I going to not be truthful and say, hey, this guy's great? So what I did was I pointed to a specific behavior that I observed, and that kind of changed the game with my conversation with him. So that was my moment. I almost immediately was set upon the fast track after that. I was offered jobs in California, which I couldn't move to California, but I wound up doing a rotation in California, Thousand Oaks, California, where I stayed there for about 9 months. And then after that 9 months, within a month, I was in an interim manager role. And after doing that for 5 months, I was a district manager, which was very hard to accomplish at that company.
Got you. No, that's awesome, man. But to your point earlier, recognizing the opportunity, right? When it's there, right? So because if you had answered that question in a very let's say unprofessional way, quote unquote, right? That could have completely turned them off on your ability, right, to handle situations like that, right? Because let's face it, especially, being in leadership, you're going to deal with a lot of stuff that you can't just go off the handle, right? The first thought that comes to mind, and being able to not throw people under the bus, right? While also still kind of getting your point across is a part of the quote unquote politics piece of it. And I think sometimes folks misconstrue thinking that, oh, I don't want to play this game, or, I got to be somebody. I'm like, no, you don't have to be somebody you're not. You just have to recognize the fact that this is a business setting, right? You're at work, right? How you speak to folks and how you, convey your message is not going to be the same way you convey it to, a direct friend or your child or parent or whatever the case may be. You're working with, in a business world. So you got to understand how to speak that language, how to articulate yourself and how to carry yourself, because people are always watching, regardless of whether you think so or not. People are always watching. So,
the other thing I'll add, just in terms of the other aspect of office politics that happens outside the office. So most companies at some point will have a holiday celebration or happy hour type event, and people have to recognize that you are still at work, right? And so I can't tell you the number of times where folks have had one drink and then another and then another, and then they're very comfortable and they get themselves in a position to either be talking to HR or out of a job because they forgot that they were at work. And so there's two mistakes that people typically make. They either say, well, that's not important, I don't want to go to that, which is a mistake. Or they go and they say, oh yeah, free drinks, let's do it. And so, both of those extremes are the wrong extreme. You have to show up, but you have to recognize where you are and treat it as a work function. That doesn't mean not be fun. That doesn't mean don't have perhaps one cocktail or a glass of wine, but you have to be smart about it. And I've seen people who were brilliant in every other aspect, and then when they got to the bar at the happy hour or the Christmas party or the sales meeting, they lost their mind. Or they forgot that they were at work.
No, I think those are two really, really good examples, honestly, because Christmas parties and holiday parties is definitely a thing for sure. And, thinking that, oh, well, if I have a couple of drinks and I get a little loose tongue, it's okay because everyone else is doing. Like, no, it's not. It's not, because people are going to remember it. Guess what? You're going to be the topic of conversation the next day at work. Everybody's quote unquote that water cooler talk. You don't want to be that topic. You don't want to be that person that was doing the most or could barely get to their car or whatever the case may be, right? Because like you said, you could be in a really rough situation. You wind up doing something that was highly inappropriate. It get back to HR and now you're out of a job, and that stuff happens. It's real. So, understanding, not like you mentioned, not being on one extreme or the other, and also still showing up to events like those, because that's the other thing, right? I mean, folks think that, oh, I don't want to go out and hang out with these folks, or I don't want to do this, or I don't want to do that. It's like, okay. And when you're not there, guess what? People notice that too. They notice that too. And so, and you want to be able to just have a healthy balance of being social, being quote unquote, for lack of a better word, likable to some degree, and also being, knowing how to do your job and do it very well. So I think those are really, really great examples there. So awesome. So pivoting a little bit more, we've all gone through rough periods, right? In our careers, and clearly, you've seen, especially being in leadership, I would imagine you've seen the ups, the downs, of what a career can have. And I guess I wanted to hear from your perspective, or maybe talk a little bit about one of those rough periods and how you were able to kind of work through it. Because I think it's important not to just hear the highlights, right, of all the good things that happen in our career,
Sure.
but how did you maybe have something that particularly sticks out in your mind that was a rough period, and how did you maybe get through that?
Listen, sales is a numbers game, as is advancing your career. And what I mean by that is you're going to have more misses than shots made, right? You're going to have more, generally speaking, more failures than successes.
Mm-hmm.
So when I was approaching my first management job at Amgen, I had applied for a few jobs before that and didn't win those jobs.
Mm-hmm.
And began to question, okay, am I as good as I think I am? Is there a reason I'm not winning these jobs? How do I go back to the drawing board and figure out how to show up better? And sometimes it's not necessarily about showing up better. So listen, my belief system is based in my faith. And I believe that what is for me is for me.
Mm-hmm.
So what God has for me is for me. There's nothing that's going to change that. All I can do is show up and be my best and do my best. But what I mean by it's a numbers game. So once I advanced in my career and finally got promoted, I had other people that were trying to get either into the industry or trying to get a job once they got into the industry. And, they didn't get the first thing they went after. And so they split. And, part of it is resilience. You just have to, it's resilience and it's strategy. So at this job, the company I'm at right now, before I landed this role, this director role, I applied for and didn't get 3 other director roles. But I knew going in that it was going to be very difficult and competitive to get this director level role. So part of my strategy was to go for jobs and interview and make such an impression that I built advocates within the organization, such that eventually when my time came, I would be the obvious choice. And I would have half a dozen people or more saying, oh, you know what, that guy Will, we couldn't hire him for this role, but you'd be a fool if you don't hire him for the next role. Right.
Mm-hmm.
So part of it is embracing the rejection, getting better, not taking it personally, and recognizing that it's a numbers game. You're not going to win every time, but if you can take something away, if you can build a relationship in the process, if you can develop an advocate, a mentor, a sponsor that helps advance your career along the way, you ultimately end up winning, provided you continue to perform at a high level and continue to be ready when your moment arrives.
Yeah, no, that's beautiful. No, that's awesome. I think there's a lot to be said, right, about the resiliency piece of it. Because like I say, you're not always going to get the first one that comes around, and sometimes those, like you mentioned, I have the same belief that what's for you is for you, and just because you didn't get that role, maybe it wasn't the role that you should have got, and so because it might have been on a very terrible situation that you didn't know about and could have played itself out over 6 months to a year, and you look back and say, oh man, thank God I didn't get that job, or I didn't get that role, and because that happens too, it happens all the time.
That is a key point. I've done that, and I would encourage your audience to do that, right? So I've looked back at jobs that I thought I really wanted, and could see that, wow, I really dodged a bullet. Turns out that person was a horrible boss or leader. Or, you know what, that company went under. So I was actually being protected from this great opportunity, and ultimately ended up where I was supposed to be. So I think you're exactly right. Looking back, you can see, hey, that wasn't where I was supposed to be. This is where I'm supposed to be.
You spend a lot of time, mentoring folks and students and early career and mid-career professionals and things of that nature. Maybe what's some of the most frequent mistakes that you see for folks that are trying to maybe get into your career or advance in the industry? I mean, you talked a little bit about it before, but just from that perspective, as you're going out and mentoring folks, maybe what are some of the mistakes that you think that folks usually make?
I think there are a few. I think the biggest mistake people make is quitting at the first sign of failure. And as I indicated before, sales is a numbers game, and also getting a job in sales, whether it's pharma or something else, is also a numbers game. So if you recognize that rejection is a part of the equation, you expect to get rejection, and you keep going forward. You just keep pushing forward. The other thing I can say is, as you alluded to, I have mentored a lot of people and been asked to help folks to get into the industry. And usually I'll sit down, especially in the pre-COVID area, right? I would sit down with someone and get them, hey, do A, B, and C, and let's reconnect in 3 months. About 95% of those people either don't do A, B, or C, or they don't follow up in the way that we agreed upon. And that gets back to what we talked about before. I can't want it more than the person I'm trying to help. In almost 100% of the cases who did A, B, and C and followed up with me, they were eventually able to land the role that they wanted in the industry. And, you got to kiss a lot of frogs to get the prince, man. So many of them have had a lot of opportunities to interview, and they learn from each interview and build on the interview, but they keep going and keep pressing. So I think the biggest mistakes is quitting too early. I used to share this story back when I was working with college students, when I worked for Inroads, and the story was called Acres of Diamonds. And it was about a guy who owned this big patch of land, and he was trying to find diamonds. And he finally gave up and sold his property to somebody else. And that somebody else invested a few more dollars to hire engineers, environmental engineers, and geologists to figure out where diamonds would most likely be. And the way the story goes is, less than 10 feet from where the guy stopped searching was the start of Acres of Diamonds. And rejection, as humans, rejection is something that is difficult to accept, right? But it's a part of the game. It's a part of the process here. And if you're doing it right, after you get a rejection, you're asking, hey, can you help me? Can you share some feedback on what I could have done better in this interview process? Some interviewers, they'll say, hey, you did everything right, but others will tell you, well, hey, here's a couple of things that I would work on. And the other thing that interviewers do is they say, hey, tell me about some of the other roles you applied for and what the feedback you got. And if you can say, oh, well, the guy said that I didn't have enough experience in this, or I didn't do enough work on that, but you can describe what you've done to improve or build since you got that feedback, then you haven't grown and you're less likely to advance. So what I want to see as an employer is someone who has a growth mindset and who can reflect on what it is they need to do to constantly get better. Because the game is constantly changing, the bar is constantly being raised, and we have to be in a constant state of, okay, how can I get better?
Awesome. Yeah, I mean, you dropped a lot of gems there. I mean, having a growth mindset, being able to, show receipts, right? When it comes to opportunities you've worked on, being able to clearly identify your weaknesses, right, versus your strengths, not giving up, right? In the example that you gave, right? It's not always the first opportunity. And sometimes you give up too early, boom, you might have hit your bed of diamonds, right? For lack of a better phrase. So no, man, that's really awesome. It's really impactful. I hope folks are writing this stuff down and really absorbing it. So that's great. So as we kind of bring this to a close, is there any resources or material out there that you recommend for folks that are trying to maybe pursue, a successful career like yours? Clearly you've invested, in your own development, but is there any resources that you recommend for folks to kind of, reach or look out for?
Yeah, I mean, there are tons of resources out there. I'm a huge podcast person myself, and I get inspiration from podcasts. And it's not necessarily about, pharmaceuticals in particular. Like, so one of my favorite podcasts is called How I Built This. It's from NPR.
Yep.
And they basically interview entrepreneurs from, the founders of Netflix to Uber to Five Guys, burgers and fries. And you find out, the real takeaway from all of those podcasts, which is applicable to this business, is you just figure it out. You go for what you want and you figure it out. I also, there's a number of different books that I recommend and have leaned on over the years. There's a leadership book called Talent is Never Enough by Jim Maxwell. There's a bunch of books by Maxwell on leadership. I read biographies of successful entrepreneurs and political figures. Like being well-rounded actually helps you in this business and in other businesses as well. So I've got, the next time I talk to you, I'll go through all of my books, my business books. I've got books on Bill Gates and Oprah Winfrey and Barack Obama and Michelle Obama and Hillary Clinton. There are a lot of resources that are available. There are books on leadership. A guy named Warren Bennis who wrote on Becoming a Leader. It's an old book, but it's powerful. Dale Carnegie's How to Win Friends and Influence People. Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. Like, all of these books on leadership and some on inspiration and some on even executive presence are things that can help people to refine themselves and to get better at how they show up and to be more broad in their thinking. One of the business books that I would recommend is Blue Ocean Strategies. It's a book from business school. It helps people to think about their business. And that's how you should approach your job search. And once you get into this job. So, just as a final thought, beyond the resources, is just, what I tell my kids, my sales teams, my marketing people who work with me is the best story wins, right? So if you're selling a product, if you're selling yourself in an interview, you own your story and you have to master the art of storytelling. It's a lost art, but it's very critical in the sales world. It's also very critical in the corporate world. We answered the politics question earlier. If you can make complex ideas simple in the boardroom, you will distance yourself from people that you're competing with. The best story wins.
Awesome, man. No, I really love those closing thoughts. No one should be able to tell your story better than you can, right? No one. So really, really appreciate your time today, Will. I think you dropped a lot of really great nuggets of information, and I really hope folks really took some good notes here. So really, really appreciate your time. Thank you so much. Is there anything you want to share, maybe contact information about yourself? If anybody wants to get a hold of you on LinkedIn or anything else like that.
Listen, so too, thank you for inviting me. I've enjoyed the conversation as well. I am on LinkedIn, Will Womble on LinkedIn, and folks can look me up and send me a connection, tell me you heard the podcast, and I'll accept that LinkedIn connection request and we can start a dialogue.
Awesome. So thank you so much. Really appreciate you guys for listening.
Hey, thanks for tuning in. For more content, please click the subscribe button and follow us on all social media platforms at How to Corporate. Until next time, keep building.